Hi guys, welcome to another Monday night live stream. We've been going through Genesis and we've just looked at the first 5 chapters, and we're going through some of the extra biblical history books to fill in the gaps. So we've went through Genesis 1 through 5, and if you remember, that's kind of where we stopped at. Chapter 5 gives us the genealogies of Adam, and we've looked at the charts and those kind of things just to see. And just to remind you, over at our DSS calendar website, we have the basic calendar here, videos on how the calendar works. And we have the calendar here. You can just click on whichever one and it goes through and shows you the calendars. But we also have what right here is ONA studies. And we've broken up time. Supposedly it's in 7,000 years. 14 sets of 500-year periods, which are called ONAs. So if you click on this, we get the basic start of the calendar and information on it, but we have all of these ones. So when we start on ONA 1, this is the information we get from Jasher, from Genesis, from Josephus, and other places like that. So we've got creation. We go down to Seth being born. And these are grouped, as you can see here, in Shemitahs and Jubilees, so 50-year periods. And then also we have the AM date, so you can see that's from the year 1 to the year 50. And then the BC date, which goes on up. So creation, in the middle of the third Jubilee, Seth was born, which is 130 years. So it's in the 5th Shemitah, which is between 129 and 135 years. He's born in 130. And that's 3797 to 3791. So over here we have the information. So he's born 1:30 a.m., which is from creation. And the BC time scale, AD and BC, is 3796 BC. So we go on down from that. So Enos born, Enos becomes king. Canaan's born, Canaan becomes king. Mahalalel born, Jared born. And that's everything in that first, as far as what we have recorded in that first ONA. Then the second ONA, which as you can see is the year 500 to 1000, is 3425 BC to 2926 BC, Jubilees 11 to 20. So that second 500-year period. And we have the birth of Enoch, which we'll start off with today, which was 3304 BC, according to the Dead Sea Scroll calendar and Jasher, Josephus, and other things like that. And once you plug it in, you get the same dates from Genesis. And then Enoch becoming king and it going on down. Lamech born, Adam dies, Methuselah becomes king, Naamah is born, that would be Noah's wife. And then Enoch is raptured at this point. And then we get to the third ONA. There's not a whole lot in here, but we wanted to be able to break this up in 50-year periods because sometimes there's a prophecy and it's in a certain Shemitah or a certain Jubilee, and you can see all these patterns. And when you just look at something BC, especially when it starts at an odd number, you don't see patterns. So it's interesting to kind of see this. So, and this goes all the way up to Jared's death. And then when you get into the fourth ONA, which is between 1501 and 2000, 2000 would be the time Abraham was called. And remember, the flood was in 1656, so right in the middle here. So we would go through Noah marries Naamah, Shem is born, and then we've got the kids marrying the daughters of Eliakim. Methuselah dies, the flood. So here's the flood. So according to the Dead Sea Scroll calendar and the other text, the flood was in 1656 AM, which would have been 2270 BC. And then you get the post-flood stuff here. So you can go here, and we hope to add more things to it, but that's just kind of a good start for our Dead Sea Scroll calendar. So again, we're in Genesis 5 with the genealogies, and now we're going back to the other stuff. So let's go ahead and try that. So we're going to go back to today, the Book of Jasher. We went through chapters 1 a ways back, and then last week, chapter 2. So in here, and remember this is the history book referenced in Joshua 10:13 and 2 Samuel 1:18, and then referenced by Timothy, or by Paul rather, in Timothy 3:8. And people ask about that because it doesn't actually mention the Book of Jasher or anything, but he's talking about Jannes and Jambres, who are the two magicians. They didn't play music, that come against Moses. Now, the whole story is recorded in Genesis, but Genesis does not give us their names. The names are only recorded, as far as I know, in the Book of Jasher, so referenced here. So that shows you that Paul is using these extra biblical sources too. Anyway, and then also remember, we were talking about the numbers in Genesis chapter 5. How do you know if the Septuagint is correct or if the Masoretic text is correct? Well, these days, I would say just drop both of them and follow the Dead Sea Scroll one, which happens to be identical to the Masoretic text, the one that we would have in the King James, New King James, those, not the Septuagint. But the other way of looking at this, before we had the scrolls, is that if the book of Jasher is mentioned in Joshua and 2 Samuel, and it says, compare me to this, look this, here's more information, and those two references are in the Septuagint and in the Masoretic text, it's like both texts are saying, compare me to that one. Well, if we do that, that one shows the correct dates are the Masoretic text, so like the King James, New King James. So, and basically all of the modern Bibles that aren't based on the Septuagint. So that's the majority of them. Anyway, so we were going down here. So chapter 1 was creation to Abel, Cain and Abel. And then Seth to Enoch is what we did last time. So that let us know the story behind Cain's death and a lot of the other things like that, who Cain's wife was, etc. So now we're looking at chapter 3, which is Enoch's life. And then chapter 4 is the apostasy all the way to Noah's birth. And so it actually does mention Nephilim in chapter 4. We won't get to that today. We'll probably do that next week. Very lightly. It doesn't mention a whole lot of information. Calls it rulers. But when you look careful at the text, the interesting thing about it is that it's very clear that these are not human rulers. It doesn't say that, but it's just in the text. So it's really interesting to see. So there's nothing that contradicts. We've got Jasher, Josephus, you've got the Dead Sea Scrolls, you've got the Book of Jubilees, you've got the Seder Olam, you've got all these different history books, all mentioning the same things. The Ethiopic Book of Jubilees has some contradictions, not between it and the Bible, but between it and some of the other texts. But it's not a Hebrew text either. It's translated from Hebrew into Ethiopic into English. So there's room for problems that way. So anyway, we have to compare everything to Scripture and go forward. So today we're going to look at chapter 3. And so let's back up just a little bit here. So the last part here was verse 37. Mahalalel, the son of Canaan, lived 65 years and begot Jared. Jared lived 62 years and begot Lamech. Now, in the Bible, it's 162 years, not 62. So somehow the one dropped off or the language changed or whatever. Now, we know which one is correct because the Bible is correct, and you've got the numbers like 162. And you add them all up, and the flood occurs at 1656. Once they're all added, it's 1,656 years. So in this case, if we went by this, we'd be short 100 years. But when we're all said and done and we get up to the flood part in this book, in the book of Jasher, it will tell us that it's 1,656 years. So it tallies it up for us. So if the total is the same in both texts, but we're missing a 100 here, then basically the text of Jasher is self-correcting because of the totals. The totals all agree with Scripture. So somewhere along the line, the 100 disappeared in this verse. The only way you could look at it. Okay, so anyway, so in this case, you've got, putting it in the AM scale, from creation is what AM. BC is before Christ, AD is Anno Domini, in the year of the Lord. So from the time Jesus was here. AM is Anno Mundi, so from the time of creation going forward. So Jared was born in the year 460, and Enoch was born in the year 622. So when we have Jubilees, I think it's Jubilees and one other one, talk about the fallen angels, Shemyaza, the 200 that came down, that was in the days of Jared. So that theoretically is between 4:60 a.m. and 6:22 a.m. because Jared has to be at least born. And when his son is born that takes over, that would be that one. Now, if Jared is considered a king and Enoch is mentioned as becoming king at a certain time, it might be dynasty related. So that might be 622 plus 65 or something like that. Anyway, so we've got a 200-year, more or less, time span of when that happened. So starting with Enoch, it's interesting things. So in 687, Methuselah is born. Okay, so Methuselah is Enoch's son. Now, an interesting thing about the words, I mean, Chuck Missler mentioned this a few times, that the words in the pre-flood kings list can form a sentence. And so you see that a lot. There's things like that. There's a section in the book of, excuse me, in the book of Zechariah, when it's talking about the seven-sided stone, it gives you a clue to what that is, because it's an important prophecy. It's just not listed there. It's listed elsewhere. And you have to figure out how to find it. And it's a collection of names. But if you run the names together, it forms a sentence. And is actually a prophecy of the book of Revelation and other things, the age of grace. But anyway, same kind of thing here. Now, the word Methuselah, the first part of that word is meth, and meth means death. And sometimes you'll be talking about debating, and you'll talk about it's a moot point, or at legalese, it's a moot point. It's a dead point because the reason we should or shouldn't do it has went away. You know, do we fight against a guy? Well, if he's no longer here, he's in prison or died or whatever, whether we should do something or not is kind of moot. It doesn't matter anymore. So meth, and you can also think of this too, if you use meth, which is a drug, you probably will die. So that's a good thing to kind of remember it with. So meth means death, and then you is usually a connecting term. So a selah means to send. Sheliach is how you would say an apostle, a sent one. So in this case, Methuselah can be a sentence, and if you run it out as a sentence, it's when he is dead, it shall be sent, whatever that is. And we're going to see from this clip when we get toward the flood that Methuselah dies the year of the flood. Now you can go back to Genesis, which is this here, Genesis chapter 5, and tally these up, and you'll see that when Methuselah dies, just add it up to when he was born, and he's the oldest living person on record, 969 years. So you add that in, that is the year of the flood. Jasher, on the other hand, gives us more information as usual and lets us know that he dies exactly 1 week before the flood occurs, which is pretty interesting because Genesis says 1 week before the flood occurs, they entered the ark and God shut the door. So basically, Methuselah died and was buried, and then they entered the ark and everything started. So it's kind of a sign of a rapture, resurrection type thing, but very interesting. I'm getting off the subject, but there's some interesting legends of Methuselah's grave and sarcophagus. But anyway, so in this case, when Enoch was 65 years old, okay, that's when he begat Methuselah. And let me say one more thing about this. This is interesting. If Enoch named his son this, Enoch knew from the Holy Spirit a prophecy that's not really recorded, but when his son dies, that's when the end of the world occurs. Now, if he knew that, but did not know the exact date, you can imagine, what that would be like. It clouds up, it looks bad out there, and your son was supposed to be home, but he's not. Is he dead? Is this the end of the world? Each time he's late coming home, it's going to kind of keep you focused on being holy. So it's a really interesting thing, if you think about it like that. In either case, though, it's an interesting prophecy. So it says Enoch walked with God, which means walks in holiness, does things with the Lord, with the angels, walks with God after having begotten Methuselah, and he served the Lord and despised the evil ways of men. The soul of Enoch was wrapped up in the instruction of the Lord, as we all should be, in knowledge and in understanding, and he wisely retired from the sons of men and secreted himself from them many days. Sometimes, and this is hard to do when you work for somebody. If you run your own business, you can do this, but sometimes you have coworkers that just drive you crazy, and you can't fire them, so you kind of have to either leave or deal with it. Sometimes you have people in your family maybe that have mental problems, psychotic breakdowns or whatever. And you're supposed to take care of your family, but you also can't constantly have something weird going on. You won't be able to do your work. So sometimes you have to put things and or people away. And this is one of those times where Enoch finally, if he's been there for years and he's told you over and over again, this is how you do it or don't do it, but this is how it's done according to the Lord, and of course they're always going to say, well, I don't want to do it that way. I want to do it a different way. Well, then go try it. But what does that got to do with me? Just go somewhere and try it. And there's no sense of you coming back and complaining and me telling you over again, the Lord says to do it this way. So at a certain point, you get really done with people. And so you leave. It's that kind of stuff. Maybe you have a church that's having major problems, church splits and weird stuff like that. It's like, they know better. You've probably said a couple of things, so we're done. You can't keep yourself under stress, is what we're saying. And you have, in this case, Enoch, and then there's another text that talks about Elijah. One of the church fathers mentioned that Pantinus, which was 3 or 4 guys down from St. Mark, who started the Church of the Church of Alexandria, Egypt, and they had a school there. And at one point, he disappeared to the hills. Everybody thought that's what Gnostics do, also cults. So they thought he did the same thing. So Clement of Alexandria went to find him, found him, talked with him, and it basically was the same thing. It's like, no, I'm still Orthodox, but I'm just tired of trying to get people to do what they're supposed to do. It's stressful. I'm retired. Okay, I'm just done. I'm going to stay up here, work a garden, praise the Lord, worship the Lord, wait for him to come and get me. And Clement of Alexandria came back saying, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that guy's doctrine. He did not go Gnostic or anything weird, even though that looks kind of like it. But it's interesting, that kind of thing to happen. So those things happen occasionally. So he secreted himself many days. So he's done. Oh, one thing I should mention, this is not necessarily a bad thing. We're supposed to witness, but at certain times we need a break. And at the end of our ministry, sometimes the Lord can take us away from one thing and put us on another. But Josephus, the historian, was actually interviewing one of the Essenes. And this is in Antiquities of the Jews. And the Essenes normally lived to be 120. And apparently, according to what they teach, if we follow their way of life, you and I could live to be 120. And without eyes being dim and steps haltered, So he was asking him what's, because almost all Gentiles lived to be about 60. They didn't live very long. If you had a cushy position, you were a Pharisee, Sadducee, you kind of sat in the temple, you didn't do a lot of manual work, hurt yourself. Some of those guys lived to be 70 or 80. So it's not kosher food per se. What's the secret? And the Essenes said, number one, we devote ourselves to the study of scriptures and of the school of the prophets. So not just scriptures, but the extra biblical prophecies. So study prophecy, know what's going on. We worship the Lord. We have a strict way of life. Nobody does anything they're not supposed to, or they're excommunicated from the group. So there is no disrespect or problems, you know. So in other words, they avoided that, and they said that it was their adherence to Scripture, their herbal medicine, and then also the avoidance of strife. Actually, they called it anger, but it's be strong negative emotion. You can't have anybody in the group that's angry with someone else in the group that is, whatever, makes fun of people, causes problems. Even if he was wrong in what he did and you're causing the problem now, you're out. So no stress. Can't do that. So we've got to train our kids to not cause stress. We've got to somehow avoid as much as you can. Now, if you're stuck at work or you're married or you're the child and you have to live with your parents and your parents are weird, stuff happens. But stress is the number one killer that they were talking about. And the same thing's here. I mean, if he's done his job, there's nothing left to do. So he secrets himself many days. It was at the expiration of many years, while he was serving the Lord and praying before him in his house, that an angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and he said, "Here I am." It's just like it's Abraham. And he said, "Rise, go forth from your house, from the place where you hide yourself, and appear to the sons of men, in order that you may teach them the way which they should go, and the work which they must accomplish to enter the ways of God." So he did teach them. He quit, basically, done. And then a number of years later, the Lord called him and said, "Now you need to go back one more time and do something. I'm going to do something interesting here." So, of course, he does this. So if the Lord tells you to do something, and the Lord is truly, you don't just think it, but the Lord's truly in it, it will work itself out beautifully. If you just think it's the Lord's will, it's probably not going to work out. So in this case, he tried it. He tried it on his own. It didn't work very well, or it got to a place where it didn't work. So he quits. He goes away. Years later, when it's really the right time, the Lord calls him to go back and do this. And it says, "And Enoch rose up according to the word of the Lord and went from his house and from the place where the chamber was where he was concealed." So I picture this as like a home or something, and an entrance to a cave, and it's sealed up somehow so nobody can bother him. But he comes out of that. It says he went to the sons of men and taught them the ways of the Lord, and at that time assembled the sons of men and acquainted them with the instruction of the Lord. And he ordered it to be proclaimed in all places where the sons of men dwelt, saying, "Where is the man who wishes to know the ways of the Lord and good works? Let him come to Enoch." So he basically starts a school. Oh, and incidentally, the legend of the herbal medicine stuff with the Essenes traces it back. And supposedly it goes back to Shem, to Noah, and then from Noah back to Enoch. So each one of these people had an herbal medicine something. The legend says that Enoch's herbal medicine book, I thought was pretty interesting. It said that, for like if you have a certain ailment and there's certain herbs that work, he would list 3 herbs. Okay. Like the top one would be the best, second best, and third. And the reason he would list 3 is because maybe the first one didn't grow in the mountains or didn't grow so well down at the seashore. Maybe it was salt water or whatever. Didn't say that, but the idea was you might be living in a certain area where certain things don't grow. So you need preferably 1 or 2 or 3, but if that's your best thing that you can plant and harvest. It's really interesting, and that makes sense. So it goes from Enoch, probably they all had it, but Enoch is specifically mentioned as having the herbal medicine. So is Noah, and it was given to Shem. Now the Chinese herb classic is actually, and we have very little of it left, but what we have of it, it's supposed to be written by Shun, the Yellow Emperor, who was the one to establish what we consider China. And so the yellow emperor, according to the old chronologies, he was the, let's see, great great grandson. So that's fifth generation, great great grandson, if I'm doing that right, of Shenengog, which is one of the three august ones. So the legend says that there were two people, a man and a woman, that survived a great flood. Their names were Fuxi and Nuah. And it's interesting how that, Noah sounds like Nuah, but in their thing, Fuxi was the guy and Nuah was the woman. So it just kind of flipped somehow. Anyway, there was a husband and wife that survived a flood. This husband and wife is the father of everybody, father and mother of everybody on this planet. But they specifically had three sons. They were the three august ones. And one of these was Shenengog, which sounds like Shem. His great great grandson is Shun, named after his great great grandfather, the yellow emperor who writes the Chinese herb classic. And so it's interesting to begin to put these things together. So there's several herbs that I couldn't figure out what they were or how they worked until I didn't look at the words, because the words didn't match, but the descriptions about it being like dragon breath or dragon herbs and things like that. So it's interesting to kind of piece those together. The more information we have, the better. I don't have hardly any information on specific herbs from these things because the Hagi, the herbal medicine book, doesn't seem to exist, or at least we don't have it yet. Just little references here and there to different things. So anyway, so he teaches these people the ways of the Lord. And the Spirit of the Lord, verse 8 says, verse 7. The sons of men came and assembled, all of those who desired this thing, which is to be godly, went to Enoch, and Enoch reigned over the sons of men according to the word of the Lord. So he becomes king. And this is basically, he starts a revival. So if you remember the previous chapters in Jasher, it says that there was, and this is, I think, just from last week, there was a apostasy in the days of Enos, and then Canaan was the one to figure out some of the prophecies and wrote them down. He started a revival, and it worked fairly well for a short time, and then it fizzled out, and they became evil again. Enoch says, I'm not going to mess with this. But then Enoch was called, and so this apostasy is worse than the first one. There was a minor apostasy. I shouldn't say minor, but there was an apostasy. Canaan led a revival, a bigger apostasy, and then Enoch leads a revival. And it stays fairly decent through the days of his son to a point. Then it becomes apostate, really, really bad, and does not recover. So very interesting sets of information. Okay, and they came and bowed down to him, and they heard his word. The Spirit of God was upon Enoch, and he taught all his men the wisdom of God and his ways. The sons of men served the Lord all the days of Enoch, and they came to hear his wisdom. So some of that would be in the book of Enoch, but some of it we probably don't have. The wisdom books are always interesting. The book of Gad the seer records some interesting wisdom things from King David, much like in Proverbs and Kings and Chronicles. You've got stories about the wisdom of Solomon, things like that. And all the kings of the sons of men, both first and last, heard together with the princes and the judges, and they came to Enoch when they heard of his wisdom, and they bowed down to him. They also required of Enoch to reign over them, and to which he consented. So this was the type of thing like, no, this guy would be safe. He's the guy we want to be president or ruler. And they assembled in all 130 kings and princes, that they had made Enoch king over them, and they were all under his power and his command. So 130 kings and princes. So 130 like small providences or something like that, city states, whatever. Anyway, that's pretty substantial. So you've got 130 states or city states or something that are swearing allegiance to the Lord. because of Enoch. Enoch taught them wisdom, knowledge, and the ways of the Lord, and he made peace among them, and the peace was throughout the earth during the life of Enoch. No wars. So Enoch becomes king, and that would be in the, if you go up, plug all the numbers in, would be the year 687 from creation. And you can go back to our calendar and look up and see what the AM and the BC dates are. It says, Enoch reigned over the sons of men 243 years. So you can figure out, he was so many years old, 65, when his son was born, and then he quieted himself somewhere secretly. And then if you go up to 365 and you come back, you can figure out when he became king, that kind of thing. And that's, of course, on our charts at the DSS calendar website. So that would be 687. He did justice and righteousness with all people, and he led them in the ways of the Lord. And then 874, Lamech is born. So this would be the son of Methuselah. These are the generations of Enoch: Methuselah, Elisha, and Amalek, 3 sons. And their sisters were Milcah and Naamah. Methuselah lived 87 years. This is another one of those that should be 187. I don't know what the deal is with the ones that keep dropping out. But again, it tallies it up at the end, so we know it's correct. It has to be 187. And that matches Genesis. So years, and he begot Lamech. So Methuselah is the main son of Enoch, but Enoch also had other kids: Methuselah, Elisha, and Amalek, 3 sons. And then their sisters, his daughters, Milcah and Naamah. So this is interesting. We don't know much about too many of these, but this first guy, Amalek, he's going to have 3 daughters. Those 3 daughters are going to be the 3 girls that marry Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and they escape the flood. The only ones that do. Ham, Shem, and Japheth, his 3 daughters, that are not mentioned in these texts, but we do have some of the names and some of the legends about Japheth's wife, for instance, and some of the things that she did. Anyway, so it's going to tell us later on that Amalek was the father of the 3 daughters, and those 3 girls were the wives of Ham, Shem, and Japheth. So a lot of people have this idea that one of the daughters may have had Nephilim DNA, and that's how it started, post-flood. And that would not be correct, because God would make sure the stuff was wiped out. Now, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, something of the genetic stuff made it through the flood. But it's going to be most likely, based on the other manuscripts, the technology made it through. There could be something else if it could survive water, but we'll find out eventually. So anyway, and then out of their 2 sisters, we don't know anything about Milcah, but Naamah. Now this is the lady who becomes a prophetess, a godly prophetess, and she is the daughter of Enoch, and she actually becomes the wife of Noah. So Naamah and the 3 daughters of Elimelech and Noah, those are the 8 that escaped the flood. Okay, so let's go on. So Lamech is born. And then in the year 930, Adam dies. It was in the 65th year of the life of Lamech, and you go double check these numbers, they all match, when Adam died. 930 years old was he at his death, and his 2 sons with Enoch and Methuselah, his son, buried him with great pomp as the burial of kings in the cave which God had told them. Now, some legends would try to make this cave, and maybe not, the cave of Machpelah, which might be why Abraham wanted to buy that for his sons and stuff, because that would be the correct genealogy. May or may not have been. There's other legends. So they buried him in a cave where God told them to bury him. Okay, and in that place, all the sons of men made great mourning and weeping on account of Adam. It was therefore become a custom among the sons of men to this day. And Adam died because he ate of the tree of knowledge, and he and his children after him, as the Lord had spoken. It was in the year of Adam's death, which was the 243rd year of the reign of Enoch. In that time, Enoch resolved to separate himself from the sons of men and to secret himself as at the first in order to serve the Lord. So this is that same thing again. He spent a lot of time. Everybody knows the way. It's all written down. You can either follow the Lord or don't follow the Lord. There's no sense of me staying here. So like, for instance, maybe you'll take somebody might ask me to pastor their church. So if they didn't know anything about the Lord, I'd say, here it is. Make sure they have Bibles and Bible studies. It's you just read it and follow directions. It's not that hard. Make sure you understand what it really means, and then get them going. And then after a couple of years, you should be able to govern yourself. And so I could like pick up and go somewhere else and help someone else, that kind of thing. And it could also be that they started apostatizing already at this point, some of them. I've had experiences where I've been in churches that just don't pay attention. I mean, they would tell me, yeah, you're a good teacher, and not contradict me or anything, but just not do anything. And after a while, you realize, those churches usually have people that cause problems and they don't grow. And one place I'm thinking of in particular, I was an associate pastor, and they just wouldn't do anything, and they kept making the same mistakes, running people off. And so I finally realized that I could stay there and use my gifts to get people to come to the church. And this is not my current church. I'm just talking about, this has been 30 some odd years back. And then they would get so turned off by the other stuff going on that they'd probably just leave the church completely. So I'm actually harming the kingdom of God by teaching there. And in that kind of a situation, you need to leave, because you don't want to use your gifts. Paul talked about doing everything decently and in order so that the gifts don't cause problems, which is actually a possibility. So those are things for us to think about, and really interesting moral lessons throughout all of these old texts. Something like that happened. Either they're done and they should understand, but the apostasy's probably started again. They're going to do what they're going to do. I've done my part. So Enoch did so, but he did not entirely secret himself from them. But he kept away from the sons of men 3 days and then went to them for 1 day. During the 3 days he was in his chamber, he prayed and praised the Lord his God. The day which he went and appeared to his subjects, he taught them the ways of the Lord. Much like maybe you're preaching and teaching every single day at your church, or every weekday or something. And then you back up because you want to rest, you want to praise the Lord, you want to study, you want to learn some stuff too. And so you just go twice a week. Or maybe you teach on Sundays and on Wednesdays or something. And then we're just going to do this once a week. Everybody pretty much knows everything. I'll just go remind them. And you begin to slow this down. He did this manner for many years, but he afterwards concealed himself for 6 days. So he's only preaching or teaching to the people once a week. He appeared to his people 1 day in 7, and after that, once a month, and then once a year, until all the kings and the princes and the sons of men sought for him and desired again to see the face of Enoch and to hear his word, but they could not, as all the sons of men were greatly afraid of Enoch, and they feared to approach him on account of the godlike awe that was seated upon his countenance. This kind of reminds me of the text that talks about, well, Paul even mentions it in Corinthians, about how Moses, when he was with God, actually glowed kind of because of God's presence. And they were scared, remember, and they put a veil over his face. This is in 2 Corinthians, I think. Anyway, something like this is going on. So that would kind of scare you. You're just different enough. And this is interesting to me because a lot of times they talk about, your church might talk about you got to be all things to all men to save some. So go out with the boys, don't sin, don't go get drunk or anything, but go to baseball games and go to this and go to that. It seems more like if that's really what you're interested in, then that's what you're interested in. So if you guys want to go bowling, I probably won't come. I'm not interested. You guys want to talk about scriptures or especially scrolls? I'm there. You want to talk about computers, Linux, things like that? I'm there. So, but other things, it's best to not pretend to be interested in something to build a friendship. It's good to talk to people if you really have a basis for the friendship. Everything has to be real, in other words. So they afraid to approach him. Okay. Fearing that they might be punished and die. All the kings and the princes resolved to assemble the sons of men and to come to Enoch, thinking that they might speak to him at that time when he should come forth from amongst them, and they did so. So the once of a year thing was going on, and they were ready for him this time. The day came when Enoch went forth, and they assembled and came to him, and Enoch spoke to them the words of the Lord and taught them the wisdom and knowledge. They bowed down to him and they said, "May the king live." We do the same thing. Long live the king. May the king live. And in some time after, when the kings and the princes of the sons of men were speaking with Enoch, and Enoch was teaching them the ways of the Lord, God, behold, an angel of the Lord called to Enoch from heaven and wished to bring him up to heaven and make him reign there over the sons of God, as he reigned over the sons of men on earth. So he's doing something in that form. So he's not just dead, he didn't die. So he's being caught up or raptured. There's other texts that talk about the rapture. When at that time Enoch heard this, he went and assembled all the inhabitants of the earth, that'd be all the kings and princes, taught them the wisdom and knowledge, gave them divine instructions, and said to them, I have been required to ascend to heaven, therefore I do not know the day of my going. I've often wondered, it would be kind of cool to be able to put it on the calendar, the day Enoch ascended, the day Elijah ascended, things like that. But we don't have those dates. Somebody did. Somebody knew exactly when Elijah was supposed to go, but it doesn't seem to be recorded anywhere. Now, therefore, I will teach you wisdom and knowledge and give you instruction before I leave you. Now act upon the earth whereby you may live. And he did so. So last instructions, follow the will of the Lord, follow his law, or die. Your choice. You know what I'm talking about, so either do it or don't do it. He taught them wisdom and knowledge and gave them instruction, and he reproved them and placed before them statutes and judgments upon the earth. And he made peace among them and taught them everlasting life, and dwelt with some of them, teaching them all these things. Some time, rather, a good amount of time. And at that time, the sons of men were with Enoch, and Enoch was speaking to them, and they lifted up their eyes, and the likeness of a great horse descended from heaven. And the horse paced in the air, and they told Enoch what they had seen, and Enoch said to them, on my account does this horse descend from upon earth. The time has come when I must go from you, and shall see no more be seen by you, rather. The horse descended at that time in Enoch and stood before Enoch, and all the sons of men were with Enoch, saw him. So they saw this whole thing. That's why I think they're going to see the rapture. I mean, it's twinkling of an eye, but I mean, they're going to witness this stuff. And I definitely think they're going to see us coming back riding on white horses. So I think all that's literal. Seems to be literal here. Notice this doesn't say that Enoch had a dream or somebody had a dream and this is the dream. That would make it symbolic. The text indicates that this is an actual historical event. Let's see here. Enoch then again ordered a voice to be proclaimed, saying, Where is the man who delights and knows the ways of the Lord his God? Let him come this day to Enoch before he is taken from us. And all the sons of men assembled and came to Enoch on that day. All the kings of the earth with the princes and the counselors remained with him that day. And Enoch taught the sons of men wisdom and knowledge, gave them divine instruction, and bade them to serve the Lord and walk in his ways all the days of their lives. And he continued to make peace among them. Now you might be thinking, he could do that, but there's no way I could. Yeah, you can. You have a basic understanding of right and wrong. You know, Paul says, don't you even understand we will judge the angels? Isn't there anybody in your church you could go before that could help resolve a conflict? Not that they have the force to make it happen, but we should be able to reason rightly. And if it's based on scripture, just teach the scriptures. And I'm sure you can say it wrongly, and somebody else can say it a lot better than you can, but still say it. Because someone's really wanting information, they will figure it out, and you're just helping them. So whether somebody could say it better or not, I think there are teams that could do this Hebrew translation a lot better than me and my team could, at least a lot quicker. But nobody's doing it. So hopefully there will be others. But it's that thing. Just do what the Lord has called you to do. It was after this that he arose and rode upon the horse and went up from all the sons of men after him. Look at this, though. About 800,000 men went up on one day's journey. So these are the princes and the sons of, and then probably some others. 800,000. That's quite a bit. And the second day he said to them, return home to your tents. Why will you go? Perhaps you may die. You know, this reminds me of the people approaching the Lord's mountain, and they were actually scared of dying. So it's like, Moses, you go talk to him, come back and tell us what he said. If you're not walking in righteousness, that is a definite possibility. And remember, Paul's concept of true righteousness is the righteousness of the heart. I'm definitely not perfect, but I want to serve the Lord with all my heart, mind, and soul. So I would imagine if I stood before these guys, nothing would happen with me because my heart's right. Now, I do mess up a lot, but that's because I'm still in the flesh. But now someone else whose heart is not right. In other words, they pretty much do what's righteous, but they have their pet sin and they're just not going to give that up. That's the kind of person that I would say, yeah, maybe you shouldn't go there. So this whole thing gives you the whole idea of righteousness. The Lord loves us and works with us and does everything he can possibly do to help us along, but there is a limit. You know, you have to begin to try to be holy. Not that your salvation depends on it. I'm just saying that we need to progress to become better, mature Christians, I should say. Okay, return to your tents, lest you may die. But they were not willing to return, and they went with him. On the sixth day, some of the men remained and clung to him and said, we will go with you to the place where you go. As the Lord liveth, death will only separate us. That's probably what's going to happen. So the Lord's called him, not us. So they urged much to go with him, and he ceased speaking with them. Same thing again. I've already told you this. So, and he went after them and would not return. And when the kings returned, they caused a census to be taken in order to know the number of remaining men that went with Enoch. And it was upon the seventh day which Enoch ascended to heaven. Now, this could just be the seventh day from when it all started, but knowing the calendar system, it probably was on the seventh day, which would be a Sabbath. So it's just an interesting thought. It's like all of the first fruit festivals are on Sundays, first day of the week. And so when the rabbis would teach the prophecies and stuff to their small students, the core, that was always on a Sunday. So you can see the Sabbath and Sunday all the way through history in different things. But that would be my guess, that it's not just the seventh day since it started. it took 7 days, but it's the seventh day of the week. I could be wrong. Anyway, but it was on the seventh day that Enoch ascended into heaven in a whirlwind with horses and chariots of fire. And on the eighth day, so the day after he was raptured, changed, on the eighth day, all the kings had been with Enoch sent to bring back the number of men that were with Enoch in the place from when he ascended to heaven. And all those kings went to the place and found the earth was filled with snow. So the whole land, something had happened. Maybe it was top of a mountain or something. And upon the snow were large stones of snow. And they said one to another, "Come, let us break through the snow and see perhaps some of the men that remained with Enoch are dead or under the stones of snow." So the large groups of snow, or loads, kind of like an avalanche. They thought somebody might be under that. They searched, but they could not find them, for he has ascended to heaven. That's the story here of Enoch. So next week we'll get into the apostasy and everybody dying and the things that happen. But I think this is interesting just to look at this stuff. Again, the historical account are questions we always ask, and then also the moral issues. So if you're having problems at your church, for instance, try to work it out. If it's you, then repent, just fix it. But if it's not you, try to work it out with people. But if the leadership keeps messing up, then it's not going to do any good. So you might withdraw to some other church. You need to be doing something with the talents God has given you, but do something somewhere. But sometimes that happens. Sometimes you'll go to a church for years and it's the best church ever, and something changes in leadership or the pastor, or someone dies and a new guy comes in, or somebody moves off, and just things happen and it gets better or worse or just different. And then sometimes you just need to secret yourself in your house for a while and pray to the Lord, which is what Enoch did. I think these are very potent lessons. Not just Enoch, not just Elijah, Pantinus in church history. We didn't learn that from Eusebius. None of these guys messed up or anything or sinned in any way, shape, or form. They just wanted to pull themselves away from the strife, the anger, the sin. They didn't want to hang out and work with those kind of people. And they're everywhere because the apostasy is going on. So just one of those kinds of things. Let's go ahead and stop here, and we will go to the chat room and we'll see if we have any questions. And it looks like we've got, 14 or so. So quite a few. So if you have questions, go ahead and put it in the chat. And there's a lot of chatting going on, but we send it to a separate archive. So I've got several of them here. Okay, so let's look at this. First question is, does the age of grace, the 2,000 years, end with the rapture or at the end of the tribulation period? I would assume it would be at the end of the tribulation period. The idea is that there are 3.5 ages. So the first age is 2,000 years. It's from creation to when God called Abraham. And that's the age of creation, as it's called, or age of chaos, called a couple different things. The second age is from when God called Abraham, which started basically the building of the nation of Israel, where the Messiah would come from. So it's from the call of Abraham to the end of that era. So that goes through the birth of Christ, the start of the church age, which is in 32 AD, 32, 33, something like that, and going almost 40 years further to 75 AD. So by the end of the age of Torah, it starts with the development of Abraham and Torah, and the Jewish nation, in other words, and then ends with the birth of the church, the martyrdoms, the civil war, the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, the shutdown of the Essena temple in Egypt, and then the end of the age, Council of Yavne, that kind of stuff. Now, after that, in the age of grace, That's when the age of grace would have started. So there seems to be a church age, which starts in 32 and goes for until the rapture, I guess, whenever that is. But then there's a fixed age too, which is the age of grace, which on their calendar starts in 75 or 76 AD actually, and goes to 2076. So theoretically, 2070 or 75 rather, 76 would be the start of the last half of an age, the last 1,000-year period, which is when the Messiah should be ruling. It's called the Kingdom Age. So that would lead you to believe that the age of grace is between the age of Torah exactly and the age of the millennial reign. Now, somewhere in there, we have this church age that's kind of like shifted a little bit. So it's not exactly the same thing as what the Essenes are saying, unless, of course, the Essene calendar is off, which is always a possibility. So I would assume it would the age of grace starts with 75 AD, the Council of Yavne, the destruction of the temple, and goes to 2076 or 75, whatever, which should be the start of the millennium. So that would be at the end of the tribulation. So on our side, then, you have, it depends on whether you think the tribulation is in the age of grace or in the millennial reign. I think almost all of us think it's in the age of grace. But, we'll find out. But it's right there tacked on. The millennial reign starts with the second coming. The second coming comes because of the Antichrist, and is the reason it's only 7 years long is because it's cut off. We can't stop the Antichrist. The Messiah has to. So good question. Can you explain BC and BCE, and why is BCE used? People that reject the Messiah, and it comes from, I think it started with the Jewish community, but I'm not sure. But it's used in a lot of academia now, just to be general. It's BC and BCE are the same time frame, but it means before the Common Era. So they're trying to say that instead of saying BC, which is before Christ, if you don't believe that Jesus is the Christ, there is no before and after Christ, because Christ didn't come yet. So it's simply before the Common Era. And then instead of AD, from the year of our Lord being here, if he wasn't here, then it's just this particular Common Era. So it's called CE, the Common Era. So you'll see that in a lot of books. There's BCE and CE. And it's the same thing as what we have as BC and AD, but it's just a way to get around the fact the calendar is all about the Messiah. And to me, it seems to be very disrespectful. I don't use those terms. I know about them. I don't correct people, but it's just, I'm not going to use them. To me, it's BC and AD. But that's where it comes from, or why it's used, rather. Was the serpent on the staff of Moses supposed to be a representation of sin hanging on a tree, looking forward to what Jesus did? I would assume so. It's because Jesus talked about it being a symbol of him. As Moses raised the serpent in the wilderness and brought healing to them, so Jesus will bring healing when he's raised on the cross. So it's got to be something like that. Jesus is not a serpent, so it would have to be him taking the sin of the world. So that kind of a thing, or possibly undoing what the serpent or Satan did. So I'm not sure exactly how the symbolism goes there, but it's got to be something like that. The destruction of the sin, the punishment for sin, or the penalty of sin. Super chat, $20. Thank you very much. Thank you for donations and just being part of the ministry and seeing what the Lord's going to bring in these next few years. Question, is the lake of fire existing now or a future preparation, possibly wherever future Babylon is destroyed, becoming a habitation of foul spirits, etc.? Some people think that the lake of fire doesn't exist yet. The lake of fire is usually considered Gehenna, And hell or Hades is the place of dead human beings, the spirits of the dead, awaiting judgment. So one thing we know for sure is no being, even angels or Satan or whatever, has been thrown in the lake of fire yet. So, excuse me, maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't, but it hasn't been used yet. So that's a really good question. Where it would be, I don't know for sure. Question, any significance to the distinction made between the mark of the beast and the number of his name, or simply his name? There's got to be some sort of a distinction. Don't really know what. All I know about that from what the church fathers said, there is, and I think I've told you guys this before, but Church Father Irenaeus, who was Bishop of Lyon, France, back in the 170s AD, 160s, 170s, he's writing a book on cults. And he runs across this cult that thinks they are the 144,000 and other things. So he's trying to explain to them, you can't be, because that's Jewish. That's when the prophecies are fulfilled. But in the process of doing this, they get to the 666 thing about Antichrist. Somehow they had some other weird teaching on that, I guess. So he stops writing that, and he writes to Polycarp, who was with John for 20 years before he was exiled into Patmos, and then another 20 years afterwards. So he knew him very well, worked with him from Ephesus. Him, John the Presbyter, Jason, and several of the other guys. But so he writes Polycarp and asks, did John ever tell you anything that would lead you to believe that we know the name or how it would work or anything like that? And Polycarp said, yeah, John did talk to him about that. And basically he said, the main thing is that right now you can find people whose name equals 666. And he gave examples like, I think, Ethnon, Nero, Titan, a few other, Latin names, just as an example. And it's like, but the point is, that's the name of the Antichrist. The Antichrist will not show up until after, number one, the Roman Empire splits in two. And that didn't happen for another couple of hundred years. It split in two in 476? No, 395. 395 AD. So the East and the West empires. And then sometime after the split, the entire thing falls apart. Okay, and so sometime after that, 10 nations rise up out of what used to be the Roman Empire. So the point was, you wait until you see 10 nations out of what used to be the Roman Empire arise and form a new Roman Empire. And I guess technically it doesn't even have to be from that area necessarily, but the point is 10 nations come together and form a new or a revived Roman Empire. Once that happens, you can start looking for somebody whose name equals 666. And so the way that works, in English, we have A, B, and C for our letters, and 1, 2, and 3 for our numbers, different character set. But in Greek and Hebrew anyway, you have the same character set representing the numbers and the letters. So like my name, Ken, K-E-N, just hit my mic. K-E-N means Ken, but as far as numbers go, you would add those up at 72. So I'm glad it's not 666, but you can do that with everybody's name, and it adds up to something. And there's probably one or two of us out there that equal 666. But that's out of place. First, we wait till the 10 nations come. So that's basically all they talked about as far as that goes. So the name is something, and the number of the name is the numbers of the letters added up. And some people try to say, well, 666 or 660 and 6 would be different letters. So maybe that's the name. And we don't know. We'd have to wait and see. When he's here, it will be obvious what it is. So there's definitely a difference. That's the only difference I know. So like Ken is 72. So my name is Ken. The number of my name is 72. So it's got to be that kind of stuff. But it's got, like you say, 3 of them: his name, the number of his name, or the mark. So that's about all I can say to that one. So the main thing is to look for the 10 nations. Can humans be possessed by a fallen angel? No. They have their own type of body, so they don't possess other people. Now, demons, which are spirits of Nephilim that have been destroyed, those are the ones we call demons, and those possess other people. So humans can be possessed by demons, but not fallen angels. And second to that is, if you're a Christian, you have the Holy Spirit living in you. You cannot be possessed by a demon. So this is actually, according to Eusebius, one of the errors of the Nicolaitans. In Revelation, it talks about we hate the deeds of the Nicolaitans, their teachings. They had several weird teachings. One of them was that Christians can be possessed. And they had this, special ritual whereby they would fix stuff, which is all a bunch of junk. So no. So they can't be possessed by a fallen angel, just demons, totally different creatures. In your book, Ancient History of the Essenes, you discuss the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. Is there any indication the Essenes synchronized their 364-day calendar to the solar year? Yeah, they did. The tropical year is 306. I think it's like 365.2422 or something like that days. So many hours, and you can get it down to the hours, minutes, and seconds. And so on a calendar, you can only get it down to a day, an even day. So you have to wait a certain amount of time and then add a day or something. And so we, on our calendar, to reconcile it, to keep it a solar year, we have a 365 day, but once every 4 years, we have an extra day. So a 366 day year. And then some years we don't have the leap year, and there's a whole series of math on how to fix that. The Dead Sea Scroll calendar has a 364-day year, which keeps all of the weeks even. So New Year's is always Wednesday, and Passover is always on a Tuesday. So it's always the same, which really makes it nice. It's a nice, simple calendar, and you can figure when everything happened. But like any other calendar, you're going to have a few minutes and seconds or hours every year that get off. So the way the Dead Sea Scroll calendar works is they don't have a leap day, they have a leap week. And it was confusing for a while. We finally figured that out because in the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves, they have calendars. And one calendar goes 5 years and then starts over. The other calendar goes 6 years and then starts over. So 2 separate ones. And during those 5 or 6 years, they're together. There are no extra days or anything. And on some of these calendars, they actually have moon phases. So you can tell that, there's no extra anything, just to kind of corroborate the calculations. So the way that it works is every 5 to 6 years, there is a leap week. And the easy way of doing this is the New Year's always starts on the Wednesday closest to the spring equinox. And you don't have to go out and look around and see stuff. The spring equinox on the Gregorian calendar is always March 20th. I think 2 or 3 times in a century, it's the 19th, because it's actually like, 5 or 10 minutes before midnight, but it's almost always the 20th. So if you just pick, just as a general rule of thumb, you can always double check it on our calendar, but the general rule of thumb is find the spring equinox, which is March 20th, find the Wednesday closest to March 20th. That's New Year's. And so what's going to happen is it's going to start 2, 3, or maybe even 4 days out, 2 or 3 days out anyway. And each year it's going to go 1 or 2 days, because our calendar has a leap day every so many years. So that's going to change that. But it's going to eventually go along with that with the equinox and then drift back. So when it drifts more than 3 days back, that'd be 4 days. Wednesdays, there's 7 days in a week, so there's 3 on each side of Wednesday. So when it goes back to 4, it actually would go back to the previous week. So at that point, you would simply add a week and you would be in front of it again. So the actual Wednesday of New Year's is always within 3 days of the equinox somewhere. So it's a really pointed system. But the fact that the weeks don't change and holidays are always the same is what's really amazing. So yeah, that's how they synchronize it. They keep it. Otherwise, eventually Passover would be in the fall and, it'd get messed up like that. So it is truly a solar calendar, just like the Gregorian. We just do it slightly different. If you wanted, technically you could say the Gregorian calendar is more accurate in pinpointing the solstice, or the equinox rather, the spring equinox, but our weeks are off, always different. The leap week system keeps the weeks in sync and everything in sync and is only give or take 2 or 3 days. Whereas the lunar solar type calendar that the modern Jews have is they have a leap month. So that can get you all the way up to 2 weeks off, which could mess up crops and stuff like that. Anyway, so that's the difference between them. Question, when did the Septuagint become corrupted, since it was around during Jesus' ministry? According to the church fathers, the original one was created by the 70 scholars. This would be like 100 and something BC, or 100, 200 BC, something like that. And it was supposed to be word perfect. So like right now, you can look at it and it says Adam was 230 when Seth was born instead of 130. So that's not hard to figure out, 130 or 230. So somebody deliberately corrupted something. But according to Origen, he said he had something called a hexapla, which is all of the Septuagints in order. So he had the original and then the fake ones, or the messed up ones. One was created by a guy named Symmachus. This is all after the time of Jesus. The other one was created by a guy named Theodore, and the other one was, I want to say Aquila. Anyway, 2 of these guys were Gnostic, and one was more like an Ebionite, a kind of a Jewish thing, denying parts of the Lord. But each one of these 3 went and cut out pieces of scriptures they don't like. They didn't add anything, but they just cut stuff out. And so Origen would have the original, these 3, and then the original again with Hebrew characters, just so because it's the Old Testament. So just kind of compare those 2. So the New Testament in Greek, the New Testament in Hebrew, or it's Greek with Hebrew letters, rather, put it that way. And then so people could read it if they didn't know the other language, and then the other 3. And he says if you have them side by side like that, you can very easily tell which one's correct. Because even in the Old Testament, something will quote something else, and if it's not there, it's not there. So it's pretty interesting that way. But that's supposedly that happened sometime after our Lord, for the reason of cutting things out to make it not work with Jesus, like changing the dates and stuff like that. So we have in the Seder Olam, it talks about how a rabbi named Yoshi deliberately changed the calendar dating system because he didn't want it to refer to when the Messiah was supposed to come. He said that prophecy actually means the destruction of the temple. So he had to try to change it some 40 years, but that really doesn't work because, the King Artaxerxes is the guy that married Esther, and he reigned at a certain time. And you've got all these kings from all these different places. To change something even 20 to 30 years, it's not going to fit with all the other histories. But that's what they tried to do, and that's how we got the modern Jewish calendar being 167 years off from the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. Fascinating to study these things and to think there's actual historical documents that tell you who, what, when. So it's pretty cool. So around Jesus' ministry, it should have been perfect. And 2nd century sometime is when they took all of the New Testament books and started creating a canon. So a copy of Matthew through Revelation. And that was originally done by a guy named Lucian, who headed a team to compile them all. Everybody checked them. There's no differences. It's just now you have a New Testament rather than 27 books floating around. So fascinating to see that kind of stuff. In the DSS calendar, Passover's on Tuesday. Does that mean that it starts at sunset Tuesday and goes to Wednesday? When the special Sabbath, when is the special Sabbath of unleavened bread starts? Let me show you real quick. Okay, so if we go to the calendar for this year, so Passover is Tuesday. So it actually starts on Monday night and it's all day Tuesday. So Tuesday night is when unleavened bread would start. Actually, I said that backwards. Passover is Tuesday night and Wednesday. And then unleavened bread, they had to take Jesus down when before unleavened bread started because it was a high holiday. So the day when we have it on the calendar, like this says Passover, it's Tuesday, but Tuesday starts at night. So we're talking about the nighttime to the day. So you can see this the way the resurrection, everything, he was supposed to be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. So Passover preparation day. So on Tuesday, they get the stuff ready for the Passover. So the Passover meal is Tuesday night. They go to the garden. He gets arrested, taken, tried, middle of the night, and the next day he's crucified. So he's crucified on a Wednesday, sometime before that night, because that starts the High Holy Day. And so the first day of unleavened bread would start that night and go Wednesday night to Thursday. So the 3 days in the grave is Wednesday night to Thursday, Thursday night to Friday, Friday night to Saturday. So sometime after sundown on Saturday night, he could resurrect. And when they came that following Sunday morning, the stone was already rolled away and he was gone. So this fits perfectly with the Passover chronology. So it starts in the night and goes into the next day. So hopefully that helps. It's complicated. It's one of the things that let us know for sure that's what it was. There's a comment in the Damascus Covenant. It's a Dead Sea Scroll. They were talking about when to make sure you observe the Sabbath, because everybody's got to do it the same way. And so they said it was on the 6th day of the week, which is a Friday, at sundown, which starts the Friday night and Saturday. That's when the Sabbath starts. And they talk about how it's when the sun, the orb of the sun, when the orb, it's not when it touches the horizon or is completely under the horizon, but when you see half of the sun on the horizon, that's when Sabbath starts. So when the sun is exactly half set, which I should draw something to make it better. Okay, do you mind comparing your online Bible to your hard copy Bible and note the capital G and lower G's in the word God in Daniel 11, 37, and 38? It's impressive. Also shows many online Bibles are corrupted. Oh, let me do that real quick. Let's see here. So Daniel 11, starting in 37. Yeah, I see. Yeah. He shall neither regard the God of his fathers. Now, if he's Jewish, that would be proper, the God of his fathers. If he's some other guy, then it's the God of his fathers would be a pagan God and it would not be capitalized. So, and we're talking about the Antichrist. If you assume he's Jewish, then that would be the right way to do it. If you assume he's not Jewish, then that would be a mistype. But in his estate, he will honor the God of forces. That's probably definitely a mistype because the God of forces is not the one true God. Because he's not going to honor the one true God with silver and stuff. So yeah, this one should be lowercase. But all this stuff is put together by people translating it into English. So in the Hebrew, it's just going to be the word Elohim, I'm sure. Honor the God. Yeah, so Eloah, actually. So, which is a derivative of Elohim. So, yeah, it's interesting. We got to be careful of that stuff. I try to do that too. And a lot of times you come up with God and you're not sure if it's the one true God or somebody else's God. It depends on how it works. Super chat, $50. Thank you very much for the donation. Continuing to pray for you, your family, and the team. As far as the team goes, we're working together. We've taken a break this week to do more of the audio text for Jasher that go on our second site. And then next week we will start working on First Peter. So I was finishing up, and I still need to go through it one more time, but finishing up Second Peter now. So we should have Second Peter to Jude ready for people to look at, and we'll get those up for the serifs and stuff like that here. We just want to be thorough and make sure the stuff that I've been teaching online that you've been seeing is a rough draft. So some of the words have changed, and the little g's, capital G's, stuff like that. So we're getting there. But thank you very much for the prayers and the donations. Prophecy Watchers had a recent show about how John might be one of the two witnesses. Okay. Hebrew Revelation 10 says you must prophesy again to nations, to peoples, and to kings, not about. What are your thoughts? There actually is a church father, and I'm not sure which one it was, but we have two witnesses, and most people think it's Enoch and Elijah or Moses and Elijah. Probably Moses and Elijah, because those were the two on the Mount of Transfiguration, although Moses actually died and the other two didn't. So, there's some debate there. But there was one church father that said that there would be three witnesses and not two. That kind of thing happens every so often, just like a mistype. Like we were showing our stuff here, how it was missing the one. So things like that happen. But he was talking about it possibly being John. So he was thinking it was Moses and Elijah and John. And made a comment about when the Lord was talking to Peter and that he has to die and John doesn't have to die. And Jesus said, if I wanted to keep John alive until I come back, what is that to you? Now, we have a record that John did die and is buried in Ephesus, along with his disciple, John, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and I think Timothy, maybe some others. But anyway, so that's probably where that comes from. It's just kind of a thing. No other church father said it. It's just one guy. Normally we have many church fathers that teach one thing and then one guy that gets off in a number or something. But that one was more than a number. He was trying to say it might be Moses, Elijah, and John, so three instead of two. Scripture makes it clear, though, it's two. And I think it comes from somebody saying that there's two witnesses and then John. And so it's like saying maybe Enoch and Elijah are the two witnesses, or maybe Moses. Yeah, maybe Moses and Elijah are the two witnesses, or Moses and Enoch maybe, and then Elijah is actually a second guy that comes earlier than so there's a lot of speculation. It could be maybe, but nothing says that directly. And the only thing we're supposed to be looking for is that there's two witnesses. I'm sure there's two witnesses. There's 144,000 sealed, and I'm sure there's probably others, but they're not really talked about. But yeah, prophesying to the nations, to peoples, and to kings. So yeah, they're going to do that, I'm sure. Especially the two witnesses in the temple, because it talks about every eye seeing them. So we will see them all with our cell phones and other things going on there. That's not possible until like the last 20 years or so. Fascinating when all of these prophecies mean literally exactly what they said. What makes herbal medicine good and not witchcraft? Witchcraft, the word for witchcraft actually means poisoner. So if you use herbs to cause problems, that's, sin, but that's just using it in a sin in that sense. Witchcraft also goes a lot further. It has to do with demons and occult matters and meditation and stuff like that. But medicine is just medicine. So what you'll find is herbal medicines are basically from food. And if you take the food or the herbal medicine daily, then you will build up like an immunity, or it will help build um, your resistances, your system to not get viruses and stuff like that. But it's the kind of thing you have to do it consistently. So what the modern science has done, they have figured out, well, that works because of this. So if you can get a bunch of this kind of thing, put it together, highly concentrate it, it would work better. So for instance, if you're starting to get sick and you take fermented garlic, that's one of the strongest types of antibiotics that you can do. And it's actually just food. If you pig out on it, it's not going to bother you, except maybe too much garlic might make you sick, but you're already sick. But so it's that kind of a thing. But the problem, it's a blessing and a curse both, because if you're sick, you're getting ready to die because of some major problem, then the herbal medicine may not help, and you need that much stronger stuff that they artificially make. But the much stronger stuff has side effects. And so maybe you've ever done this, but you go to the doctor and they give you a strong antibiotic for something. And then as soon as you're done with it and you go off the antibiotic, sometimes you'll get thrush because it actually killed off some good bacteria. And it takes time for you to, build your immunity back. So, and then that's fine. The only warning is that they begin to go into Nephilim medicine, according to the scrolls, which is things to alter your genetics. And when they get to that point, that's the kind of medicine we want to stay away from. So anyway, witchcraft, there's a lot of studies to it, but it's a poisoner, it's an occult person. And if you're trying to find something to help you get well or stay well, actually, is what we should be doing. It's much like, don't eat donuts all the time. You'll get fat and have a heart attack and die, right? So have some, but eat some healthier foods, because the donuts are artificially created. The sugar's been bleached and all this stuff. It's not completely natural. So you at least need to eat, some salads and some good stuff along with the donuts or something like that. So, and there's a lot of things you can do. There's carnivore, there's keto, there's low things, just different things like that. And everybody's different. Some of us are allergic to certain things, so you got to be careful. But according to all of the old people, all the old historians, the Essenes who did their herbal medicine lived to be 120. And some of the texts talk about them, I'm sure they were older and slower, but they would get up, they would feed themselves, they would go out, they could see, they could do things. And then one day they just realized something is incredibly wrong. They could just tell. And so, I'm getting ready to die. Call my kids together, and they talk to him. And every time that happens, it's like within a week or so, they just flat don't wake up. So it's always a nice, peaceful death. But until you're ready to die, you still can walk and do stuff. You're not bedridden. And that's because they took good care of their bodies and ate the right things. 120. Surprisingly, there is enough. I think there are 5 or 6 what's called blue zones around the planet where people still live past 110. So 110 to 120-ish is kind of normal. And if there's a couple of them that's 100 to 110, and it's because of the kind of food they eat. And sometimes they eat different foods. Some of them eat beef, and others eat fish and stuff like that. But the main thing is they don't eat processed foods. They don't take shots, and stuff. They're usually out in the boonies somewhere, where they have their own herbal medicine, they have their own, and they have to work for their food. Like they have sheep or cattle, so they're walking around all day long instead of just setting. So there's a whole lot of stuff in that respect. But there's a lot to study on. So we definitely want to stay away from witchcraft, anything that has any occult ties or anything. But anything that's medicine or is supposed to help you do whatever is a good thing. I thought there was a division in ages between Esau and Jacob, or am I thinking of something else? I think there is a text that talks about something like that. I think it's the, what is that thing? I think it's in the Tana Eliyahu, actually. But what that is a commentary on the Epistle of Elijah and the School of the Prophets. So we don't actually have Elijah's stuff, we have this commentary. And there's some quotes from the original in it, but very little. And in one section, it talks about, they start dividing it, and there's something about a division in the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah, or something like that. And none of those match the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I'm not sure if they're just trying to deliberately mask it or if they're talking about something else. That might be what you're referring to, but that's the only thing that I know that would have divisions of ages that don't fit the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Book of Jasher, it states Isaac marries Rebekah when she's 10 years old. Do you think this is accurate, or is there another Dead Sea Scroll that refutes or verifies the age? I think it's... Okay, I don't think it's in Genesis anywhere, but I think the date is also given in one or two other places. The thing you got to remember about this is not child molestation or anything like that. We're talking about Rebecca is from a godly family. There's not that many people. There's pagans around. So you make a agreement. My son will marry your daughter. Okay, then you have that in writing. Now, when they get of marrying age, normally they get to know each other. And if they don't like each other, they can call the wedding off. But it's just a thing to make sure there's somebody that can go forward with this. So in this case, Rebecca could say, yes, when I grow up, I'll marry him. And they could, form a ketubah, or shitrai or scene or something like that, whatever they had at that time, the contract, and then change their mind later if Rebecca turned out to be bad or Isaac turned out to be bad, then anybody in the family could say, no, I'm going to nullify this contract. But the thing is, and normally they would wait till they're of marrying age. But if you lived in a place far away, or in a place where there's a definite possibility by the time she's 16, she's not going to be a virgin. She might actually be a mother by that time. Somebody's going to get to her. So if it's a dangerous place, you go ahead and take her. But you don't consummate the marriage until there's actually the contract is finished. Say the ketubah is signed. And so if you look at this, the same, like in Jasher, it talks about she's 10 years old. And so she goes to marry, this guy. But then it doesn't say anything more, except if you look at how old was she when she had her firstborn child? If they start having sex, there's going to be a kid fairly quick unless there's a medical problem. So when did she have her firstborn child? She's 21. So that tells you that for safety, they took her, added her to the family, but the marriage was never consummated until the ketubah was signed. And that's when they were of age. And apparently neither of them were sleeping around or weird or whatever, where they could do that or break the contract. So that's what we're talking about. So when we look at that, we think, ooh, that sounds very bad. And it's like, that's probably the best thing you could do to save her in that case. Make sure she's protected and she's in a family, and the family would not allow anything to happen, period. Very, very strict. That's one of those things, like if the kids don't obey you, they can be put to death. It's that kind of a thing. You will be pure until you're married. So hopefully that helps. It sounds weird for American ears. Question, regarding when it talks about the seven-headed beast and one of the heads getting deadly wounded, it doesn't say it was wounded in the head. The heads represent people, right? Actually, the head, in my opinion, The heads represent the 7 empires. And so it talks about the 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. Well, the one that is at that point was the Roman Empire. So you've got these, and people debate on what the empires were, but there were 5 empires, and then the Roman Empire was ruling at that time. Somewhere along the line, that empire will split in 2 and then completely fall apart. That gets us to 395 and then 1945 with the final split, unless there's something else I don't know about. And then after 1945, there should be a reconstituted form, which is actually the 8th or the 7th kingdom. And the 7th kingdom is that the 7th head, or the empire, I should say, the 7th empire. So that's what we're talking about. And we see the same kind of empires not only in John in Revelation, we see it also in Daniel with the statue, the 7 metals. And we see it also again in the Testament of Noah from the Dead Sea Scrolls, the same 7 metals. So it's a consistent understanding of empires. Yeah, and it doesn't say it was wounded in the head. It was just a deadly wound and it was healed. And that concept is that the empire comes back in some form. Now that 7th head has 10 horns, and the horns represent individual nations. So these 10 nations, whomever they are, before the Antichrist comes, this 10-nation confederacy comes together to form a revived Roman Empire, which there is a little bit of talk about now. Nothing specific going on, but if we pull back, especially if we leave NATO for in Greenland and all the stuff that's going on now, they'd have to reform something, and they might choose to reform an empire type thing. That's kind of what, in a different form, the EU might be considered, although it's not really a thing yet per se, and there's more than 10 kingdoms, or 10 nations, but we'll see what happens. There's 10 somewhere. But that's basically what it represents. And then you'll also notice that it's 10 horns with 10 crowns. And then in the next chapter, it's 10 horns with 7 crowns. And we're told that the Antichrist attacks 3 of the 10 nations and destroys them. So the nations are still there, but the governments are gone. He's controlling them. So he's the 11th out of 10, and after the war, he's the 8th out of the 7. So those are the way that I look at it. And those are the things I'm pretty sure on. There's a lot of other details I'm not too sure on. We'll get back into prophecy sometime here pretty quick, or this year, kind of. Can a person get the original Hebrew text of the New Testament that you use in book form, but not translated, but in Hebrew? Yes, you can actually. Okay, I'd have to pull that up. Okay, so let me just tell you. So if you use eSword, like I do, you can go to just the regular eSword. You don't have to go anywhere else. You can just go to the regular downloads for Bibles, and it's called the Salkeson-Ginsburg New Testament. Okay, and the story behind this is that there was a guy named Isaac Salkeson and a guy named Christian, and I forget his first name, but Ginsburg. These 2 guys, the story is that they were Jewish. They became Christian. They became Protestant. They became believers, very clearly believers in a premillennial concept and, a lot of other stuff. But they Salkeson mainly decided to travel throughout Europe to find old copies of the Hebrew New Testament. Because he, much like in my mind too, even if it was originally written in Greek, the people that wrote it were Jews. So they're writing in Greek for their audience, but they're thinking in Hebrew. So when you have a Greek idiom, it's really obvious it's a Greek idiom. But when you have something that's confusing, it's because it's an idiom, but apparently it's not a Greek idiom, or we would understand it. So it's got to be some sort of Semitic, either Hebrew or Aramaic idiom, because they're thinking in Hebrew. So anyway, he goes through and he does all this, and eventually they compile it. Now, at first, everybody, for the last 100 years, everybody said they just made this stuff up. There is no original Hebrew or whatever. Nobody said it was original. It's just extremely old. Somewhere along the line, there was an original in a language, and then there were translations in multiple language. There's Old Aramaic, there's Old Latin, there's two different Coptics, there's Georgian, all those things. And the wording choices are a little different, but the Old Hebrew, church fathers even talk about the Old Hebrew is very interesting. It actually gives you more information than the Greek does. Doesn't mean it's the original. It's just a really good translation. Now, later on, we get translations from the Greek and all these other languages. That doesn't amount to anything because you're just taking, like me, taking the King James and modernizing the text. It doesn't really help. So, but yeah, you can get that. It's called the Salkeson-Ginsburg translation. There's actually some PDFs out there too. I don't have a, oh, maybe I do. Let me just see here. Okay. Yeah, let me show you this. So this is, I've just got it in a, do this here. This is a PDF form, but this is Salkeson-Ginsburg, Hebrew New Testament. And you can go through and see here's Matthew, here's Mark, there's Luke, there's John. And you can see it's 272 pages. And that would be the Revelation. Information about who got it and everything. And here's Gospel according to Matthew. And it starts off, this is verse 1. This is the book of the genealogies, and it goes on down from there. So, and anytime you have the two dots here, if you can see that, let me do this a little better. No, not quite that big. Okay, there we go. So like the two dots right here, that's the end of a sentence. So this is the first sentence, and the two dots, what we call a colon, is a period. So that's that. This starts verse 2, even though right here it says it's 2. It means from here forward. And it would go all the way down to here. That's, well, the other way. Once it's in PDF form, it's hard to use a little bit. But yeah, Salkeson-Ginsburg translation. Let me, okay, I can't do that. Anyway, so you can get that eSword, or you can just look for it out there. Salkeson-Ginsburg. And that's our base that we're doing. So that is really amazing. I just finished 2 Peter today, going through the finished product, dotting my I's, crossing my T's, making sure the first letter of each sentence is capitalized, you know, all the little things, but it's pretty interesting, pretty eye-opening. So let's see here. Okay, I somehow got out of that. There we see. A couple more questions. What would we as believers do when digital ID is required in the U.S.? We are supposed to submit to our government. We are also supposed to resist anything going toward the Antichrist type system. Now, the Antichrist is a guy who's a king of a country north of Israel. He apparently takes over everything, and he causes everyone to take a mark, and that's in the middle of the tribulation period. So our digital IDs are not the mark, but it's that kind of a thing going that direction. It is a violation of the Fourth Amendment, our right to privacy, because you can't really have privacy doing that. I'm supposed to be able to walk down the street, and if a policeman says, hey, who are you? I'm supposed to be able to say, never mind. Well, let me see your driver's license. I'm not driving a car, so no, leave me alone. And it's just supposed to be the way it is, unless they have a warrant for an arrest. So we do have to nicely, the policeman's only doing his job, but we need to talk to our representatives and make sure that we don't have those kind of things, like the reverse warrants and stuff like that. Those have been made illegal in Kansas. So we just need to, when the majority of people say no, that's when it's going to happen. So we do need to, as much as possible, keep things the way they are. Somebody's always going to try. And like Chicago is always trying to get rid of guns, and it keeps going to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court keeps saying you can't do that. It doesn't matter what's on the gun or whatever. They have a right to get. And then this last time, a few years back, they said you can have guns, but you can't have ammo. It's like, that is an infringement to the right. You can't do that. And we have a right, Fourth Amendment right to privacy. So if I want a digital ID, that might work, but I don't have to have that. I don't have to have a credit card. We have to have money, or we start doing the bartering system. And if they want taxes, bartering is kind of out, so they best leave cash alone. So it's that kind of a thing. So I don't know that we're going to have that much of a problem with it here, but we do need to guard against it. It's very, very important. Digital IDs, if that's what you're talking about. The other thing with digital IDs is they're wanting us to show our, to do social media and stuff like that. That, of course, would be a violation of the Fourth Amendment. I understand the idea of keeping kids off of it, keeping kids away from porn and stuff like that. But if I have to prove that I am not 5 years old, even though I'm, that I'm of age, I have to prove it by telling you who I am. And I can't just say that, because my kids could say that. I have to somehow prove it. And that means you now have my driver's license, Social Security, something, which they may have it anyway. But to say that I have to prove who I am is irrelevant. One of the things that's going to happen, if that actually does happen anyway, there will be a movement of, and it's already started, but decentralized social networks. So the idea is, instead of having 1,000 servers or 10,000, whatever they have at Facebook, to have Facebook, and the Facebook has to require you and all this stuff, we all have a computer. So 1,000 of us or 10,000 of us with our 10,000 computers form our own network. So it's decentralized. And I'm not going to require anything like that. I don't care who you are. If you come on my network and start blaspheming God, you're gone. But if you don't, then I don't care how old you are. And the government's not going to tell me that, well, you need to keep a record of this stuff. I wouldn't have a record of it. I just have a computer that uses a certain kind of thing, like email. Email is decentralized. So I can get an email from you. I don't know who you are. I can't keep a record of who you are. There's no way I can figure out who you are. It's just whatever at Gmail, or in my case, it's whatever at BibleFacts.org. And it's just because I created a website, and I pay somebody $10 a month, or maybe do it here in my office. BibleFacts.org happens to have an email client. It's stored somewhere. So I know who I am, but I don't know who you are. So that decentralized thing would help with a lot of that stuff. There's actually quite a few of those. There's things like Mastodon. There's decentralized things like YouTube, like, what is that called? PeerTube. So there's a whole bunch of things like that in different countries. So, and that's the whole idea with Telegram. Even though you have to give them your phone number so that there's no spam accounts or whatever. So some of Signal doesn't do that, but Telegram is, I know, over 1 billion people now. So it's like one of the top 4 or 5. So it's YouTube and then Facebook, and then Facebook actually owns like WhatsApp and a few other things. And then there's 2 large networks that are Chinese. So if you take YouTube, Facebook, and everything it owns, and then the Chinese stuff out of the picture, excuse me, Telegram's the largest network. So that's pretty interesting. But yeah, there's a lot of things we can do. And that's why a lot of us are doing these things, because if there is no way to, you can't require me to have somebody, I can't require your information before I receive an email. If you know what my address is, it's just not possible. So as long as they're made that way, that would take care of it. So those are some of the things that we can do to push back on this. We have a right to worship whoever we want in the way that we want. There's a right way and a wrong way, but the government should have nothing to do with that. That was the main problem with, well, we won't go there. Anyway, so that's those are some of the things we can do. Number one, it's always best to talk to your representative. And if all of the Christians that are serious, that believe the scriptures and believe about the mark of the beast, get to know them, find out who there is, for your city, and go talk to your representative and say, I do not want any kind of digital IDs. And if you're the only guy, it's not going to help, but try it anyway. And if a bunch of us get around to it, the representative is supposed to take that information into the Senate, the state, And so that's just the way it should be done. That's the easy way. And if enough of us still complain about it, it won't happen. Otherwise, we'll have to be injured, go to court, and take it up to the Supreme Court. Super chat, $150. Thank you very much for the donation. How does the Old Testament idea of the gates of heaven being open during an appointed season map out to the Essene calendar, and what scriptures define that timing? Love you all. Thank you. Love you guys too. I'm not sure about that. From what I understand, the thing about the gates of heaven being open is part of the rituals in some of the Moedim, the festivals. The problem with this, we could know everything perfectly, I think, with times and everything. The problem is, like the Passover Seder is the ritual for Passover. If you actually go through that and look at it piece by piece, even if you never looked at it before as a Christian, you'll see death, burial, and resurrection of a Messiah who is the second person of a triune God in the matzah tov and in the hazel sandwich and the ritual. I don't know what else it could mean. It's really, really clear. So we should assume that on Passover is when the Messiah is crucified and resurrects, that Passover week, which is exactly what happened. So if we had the rituals for all of the other Moedim, I think we would know exactly what they teach and exactly when and everything is going to happen. I think it'd be really easy, but we don't have those rituals. We have a little bit of them for like some of the Pentecost stuff we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls, like in the Damascus Covenant, actually has parts of the rituals. So that's how we know for sure what's going on with that, which actually explains a few other things in scriptures. We have what the rabbis tell us are some of the things from the others, which is probably true, but you always got to take the medieval rabbis with a grain of salt because they're the ones that rejected Messiah. So, and like Yoshi changed some stuff. So may or may not be exactly what they say, but it fits. There's things about the Leviathan and the beast and the rapture, the resurrection, stuff like that. This Hebrew New Testament we're working on seems to be extremely clear. No dates for the rapture per se or anything like that, but connecting the concept of Moedim all over the place. So, but the gates of heaven seem like it's part of the rabbinic tradition is that on, I think it's Yom Kippur, is that right? I think it's part of the Yom Kippur that they have this thing about the gates of heaven being open, or it's in the fall rituals anyway, the fall holidays. And it's connected with several Old Testament passages, but I'm just not absolutely sure about how we're putting them together. Obviously, it's something, but we just don't have enough information to really say clearly. Maybe we will when we get the New Testament in Hebrew done. I am absolutely. I've never been a King James only person per se, but I've been a TR person. So if you're cutting pieces out of my scriptures, I object. I want to look at them and figure out what the word means. I'll do my own research on it, but don't take the words away from me. So New King James, Old King James, and I think there's 12 other Bibles that are TR based. And these Hebrew texts are definitely TR. They're not missing all those other verses, but they have extra clauses, extra words. So apparently our TR is slightly abridged. So that's what makes it exciting. But just throwing in one extra word, it's like, oh, okay, now I understand exactly what we're talking about. So how do they map into the Essene calendar? Okay. Yeah, it's we've got all sorts of clues, and it's guesswork on my part, but the Essene calendar of the ages seems to be really specific. But I hesitate to try to set a date or anything because even if all that's correct, there could still be things I don't know about. So we can know the seasons for sure. If I ever do find a Dead Sea Scroll that sets a clear date, I will definitely let you guys know because I'm not setting the date. Sorry if that popped. I'm not setting the date. Somebody else did. So, but if something like that exists, I need to let you know. And it looks like it did. It looks like the last half of 11Q13 was getting ready to tell us everything, but that's the part that's missing. So we'll see what's dug up in the next, 5 or 10 years. So God bless you. Okay, a couple more. Is there a connection to festivals and feasts like Passover starting in the evening to the creation when God said there's evening and morning, starting the mark between the days? Yeah, I believe so. That's just the basic calendar. The day starts at dusk, at sundown, when it gets dark. And so even though you have sunrise, which is the day and the night, it's exactly the same in English as it is in Hebrew. In English, we have a 24-hour day, and that 24-hour day is compressed of a 12-hour day and a 12-hour night. Now, who in the world named half of a day and the other half of a day a night? I don't know. There should be different names, but that's just the way it is in English and in Hebrew. So that's what's going on there. So yeah, but the Gregorian way of doing it is that we start in the middle of the night. I don't know why we picked midnight, but it's not exactly half, but anyway, somehow it got started that way. But yeah, that's just the basic way the calendar works. And it seems to be the actual calendar, in my opinion, that is used in the Old Testament. It sure fits. So if that's the case and we start thinking in that calendar, we see a lot of things in the Old and the New Testament that we didn't see before, like things like that. So yeah, I think they're directly connected, all part of the same system. Hi, Dr. Ken. What is the best scriptural reference to counter the pre-wrath view of the rapture? It seems all pre-trib passages can be used to also propose a pre-wrath. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, none of them definitely can be post-trib, but it seems to be it's before the wrath. And the problem is, or not the problem, but the question is, when it's talking about before the wrath, are we talking about the last 3.5 years of the 7-year period or the entire 7-year period? And so that's the big debate. And I think it's pretty clear about a pre-trib, especially when you look at the Hebrew version of Thessalonians. I think probably the best scripture that I would use in that area is that the day of the Lord is the tribulation period. So that it's the same thing. The question would be, is that day of the Lord the last 3.5 years of Daniel 7 or the entire 7? That's what would make it either a pre or a mid. But when you go back in Joel, and he talks, I think it's Joel chapter 2, when he talks about the day of the Lord, one of the things he talks about is the day when the animals attack. You know, the passage where it says he'll run into a bear and he'll run, and if he escapes from the bear, he's exhausted. He puts his hand on a tree to stop and rest, and his hand's on a tree and a snake bites him. It's like everywhere you go, there's animals attacking. Well, if you go to the book of Revelation, the animals attacking is in the 5th seal. And so a lot of people would look at the seals as being either before the tribulation period, which that's kind of been a modern idea, or at least the first half. So if Joel is saying the day of the Lord, which, Paul says that we're taken out before the day of the Lord in Thessalonians, And Joel says the day of the Lord is when the animals attack. And the animals start attacking in the first part of the 7-year period, according to Revelation. That makes it the entire 7 years. That's just one way, but I think that's probably the easiest way of looking at it. And then the timing, probably another one that might even be easier than that, is Daniel chapter 12, because it talks about how the resurrection occurs, and then there's the shining ones or the glorified ones. So since Paul tells us the rapture resurrection happens at the same time, then in Daniel 12, it starts with a resurrection, apparently / rapture, glowing ones. And then it says there's so many days from that event to when the abomination of desolation sets and the persecution begins. And then there's a different set of numbers. One's time and a half, the other's, which is 1260. And then from there, there's 1290 with different number between the abomination of desolation type thing and the end. So that to me shows the rapture resurrection, 3.5 years, abomination of desolation, 3.5 years, more or less. They kind of overlap somehow. Don't know for sure exactly how, but that's enough to tell me a pre-trib rapture. And if you take that literally, it almost seems like there is no gap between the tribulation. The rapture doesn't begin the tribulation, it's the signing of the covenant. But the rapture could cause such chaos that they could be signed the same day even, But it doesn't seem like there's a month or a year or 5 years or whatever between the rapture and the start of the tribulation period based on Daniel 12. So those are a couple of things that I would use to kind of pull it together. I'm sure there's others. Hopefully that makes sense. And I think we should have some videos on our YouTube channel about that. What is the New Testament inspired in, or was the New Testament inspired in Greek and Hebrew separately, or was one translated from the other? We don't know. The only thing is, it seems to like the church fathers would say the original is in Greek, and that's what everybody's accepted for a long time. That's probably true. But then the church fathers also turn around and talk about Matthew, for instance. Matthew wrote his gospel it doesn't even say originally, but he wrote his gospel in the Hebrew language for the Hebrew people. Now, according to the church fathers, then everything's in Greek except for Matthew, and the book of Hebrews was supposed to be written in Hebrew for the Jews and translated into Greek. That's why it sounds like Paul in some places and not in others. Everybody anciently agreed Paul wrote Hebrews, but they're not sure who translated it into Greek. And the whole idea that Matthew wrote his gospel in Hebrew to start, and Paul wrote his into Greek for everything, but wrote to the Hebrews in Hebrew, and somebody translated it, but nobody knows who, leads me to believe that Paul did it himself. I mean, if I was bilingual, why wouldn't I write my books in English and then turn around and write one in Spanish? It just sell me more money. Sell more, So I would want to expand my reach. So if I can, and I'm writing a gospel that might get people saved, I'd want to do it in Latin, because Romans are there too. I'd want it in Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, Latin, whatever else might be there, Georgian, Coptic, because close by Egypt, just all that stuff. So it's definitely, remember that's one of the reasons I think it's one of the reasons why we have the gift of languages. Not just speaking in tongues like a prayer language, not just like on the day of Pentecost when they spoke in the Acts chapter 2 records 15 different foreign languages. But if you were given that and it was permanent, why wouldn't you also write in it? So that makes perfect sense. And there are legends. There's some church father stuff that says, one of the apostolic constitutions says that the apostles were given a language on the day of Pentecost. And when the persecution came, they went to wherever that language was spoken because they're permanently fluent in that. So they go there. So if that's the case, they would also make copies of things in those languages. So That's the logical. Nobody said that they wrote these things except for the Vodou Bible. Actually, there's an old italic Bible. Remember Peter Waldo, the Waldensians? The Roman Catholics say that that movement started with Peter Waldo in about 1100 AD. Their records indicate that they had always believed that from way back. Somewhere around the 150s, 160s AD, somebody came with the gospel to their area and translated the gospels into, or the New Testament into their language, and then later on the Old Testament also, probably using the gift of languages, the gift of tongues. But that's their story. And they have always had that. So they have an Old and a New Testament without the Apocrypha. They do have Paul's epistle to the Laodiceans. Other than that, it's identical to us as far as what's there. And that's what they banked on. And they didn't like the praying to angels or people or saints or anything like that. And apparently Roman Catholicism came a couple of centuries later. And then they had that problem. That's their history, is what they say. So I think it was interesting. So all of that together, kind of circumstantial evidence, but it seems like that's the case. So my guess is because we have the gift of languages, whether Matthew knew Greek, Hebrew, and Latin because he did all the taxes, maybe. He might have been trilingual. But even if he wasn't, the Lord could have given him that and somebody would have translated it. As far as the Gospels, according to the church fathers, Matthew wrote Matthew originally in Hebrew, and then he or somebody did it in Greek also. Everything else is in Greek. Mark writes the Gospel of Mark. Of course, he was a kid at the time, but he writes primarily of what Peter told him about. So the Gospel of Mark is actually the Gospel of Peter, not the fake one floating around, but that's from Peter and other people, but mainly Peter. And then Luke was an accompaniment. He wasn't one of the apostles, one of the 12, but he hung out with Paul most of the time. And Luke wrote basically Paul's gospel. Sometimes you'll have people like Paul will say, well, it's according to my gospel. That would be Luke he's talking about, specifically something in Luke that he said that Luke wrote down. And then John, of course, wrote John. And so you have all that kind of stuff together. So there's a whole lot to study. There's a whole lot of assuming going on my part and everybody else's too. But the more we get to these things and look very careful at what the church fathers, and I'm talking 1st and 2nd century, I'm not talking about Roman Catholics. So don't worry about, well, this is some Roman Catholic legend. No, really, really early. The guys that were, as we could say, extremely anti-Roman Catholic, very, very Protestant-like in the 1st and 2nd century, records these kind of things. Like the guy that mentions Lucian is the one that put together the New Testament. Somebody did, so I assume it's Lucian. So those are the things I would love to get more information on, and hopefully we will. So we'll see how it goes as in the next few years. So quick answer, don't know. That's my theory though. Okay, that's it for tonight. So we'll meet up back next week and we will continue our study in Jasher. And we'll also look at some of the things Josephus says, just wanting to pull together all the stuff that's pre-flood to paint you a better picture of the first 5 chapters of Genesis. And then, of course, the Nephilim stuff is part of that. So we'll look at those and the Dead Sea Scrolls that talk about them and stuff like that. Anyway, so we'll go ahead and say goodnight, and we will see you next week. God bless.